Today, I'm joined by Sam Ashworth-Hayes. He is a journalist. He's a journalist who's appeared in many of our favorite publications, in The Spectator, The Critic, CapEx, National Review, and he is the owner-operator of the Marginally Productive Substack. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on. I remember one of the essays that I read, I think a few months ago of yours. I thought was very striking. Was the Britain 2049 essay? I think it was in the Critic. It was very good. I mean, it was less of an essay. It was kind of like a short story, very zero HP Lovecrafty. I feel in tone and in how it was presented. And I mean, if you could just I don't know, give my listeners an intro about what was the story about, because it was quite gripping.
So this was a piece of pure sort of you know when he woke from troubled dreams and decided to set down all the absolutely mad stuff that he was thinking about. Sort of instance where I was trying to think about how the country might look sort of 50 years from now, or 30 years from now, actually, I guess. And sort of decided to say what would happen if you took all of the existing trends in the countries to the sort of logical extremes and then push them a little bit further. Um, and so this was basically trying to write up a sort of vaguely plausible dystopian Britain where everything's sort of run on the basis of what's good for our NHS, what's good for the sort of the landlord classes, and what's sort of good for the sort of boomer occupied dystopia that we kind of have running the country. So it was a slightly bizarre piece, but a few people said they liked it. So apparently, I didn't completely burn all my credibility
Yeah.
writing it.
No, it was because, to be honest, I mean, on my worst days, I think that a continuation of current trends is probably the overwhelmingly likely thing that's going to happen, because that's essentially typically what happens. There
Yeah,
are breaking points, there are revolutions, but usually things are on rails, and you paint a very vivid picture of what the current railway leads to, and it is quite dystopian, but also kind
and
of comfortable. Like it is very plausible because it just takes a few steps down the line to get there. It's jarring now from our perspective, but I think if someone were to read a story about 2022 and I don't know in the year 2000, they would have maybe a similar experience.
yeah. So sorry, all of your private information is held by these random tech companies in America who you and don't know what they're doing with it, but is completely fine and normal. Yeah, I think it would be sort of very unusual. And yeah, it is, to be honest, like not that implausible, some of this stuff. I suspect we might have managed to build high speed 2 by 2050, but it'll be very sort of touch and go. So for the readers or listeners rather who don't know, high speed 2 is a major UK infrastructure project. They're trying to build a high speed railway up from London through to, I think, Edinburgh. And basically, what they have been doing for the last decade is cutting bits of the line off. So it keeps getting shorter, but at the same time, the price keeps going up by a few billion each year. So it's this remarkable process where, every year it costs massively more than it did previously, and also every year it does less. So I'm sort of saying by the time we get to 2050, it'll still be being delayed. It'll just be between like London and Luton, which is a couple of miles outside the town, and it'll still cost about the GDP of Angola. So yeah, it's just there's a lot of trends you can kind of look at in the UK and sort of forecast forward. Like the idea that so much government policy has recently been sort of dictated by what's good for the NHS, and not just what's good for the NHS in terms of funding, but sort of how do we start to interfere in people's lives to make them make the right choices. How do you make them exercise well? How do you make them eat healthy? How do you make them not eat certain things, drink certain things, do certain things? So here I've decided, in China you have this social credit system. In Britain you'd have something similar. You'd have calorie credits that you have to earn to have your food because otherwise it's bad for the NHS. And that's, another thing was the work from work order, because basically there was a work from home order during the pandemic because lots of people switched to work from home, really liked it, didn't go into central London. all the commercial landlords got very unhappy about it, and the government started doing this return to the office drive, where it was saying, "Oh, you really need to start going back now." And you sort of end up going like, "Well, what business of this is yours? Why are you doing this? Why are you sort of telling companies what to do?" So I'm sort of saying, in the future, all the office work will take place in the virtual metaverse, but you'll still have to go into the physical office. So you have to go to Pret a Manger around the corner, buy your lunch there, and make sure the commercial landlords are happy. But,
Hmm.
yeah, it's like a slight exaggeration of current trends, but not that much.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so striking that, it's very very plausible, especially with, like you rightly allude to all the COVID regime orders, and the fact that these are all emergency measures, work from home, work from the office, and essentially they're partly nudged by lobbying groups and other interests, and it's all in the interest of the I know, the management of the individual, so that, you're safe and warm. And I like that in the essay you mentioned that, you might be overweight, but you're still healthy, healthy kind of has a healthy at any size type ingredient in it. You also can't be snubbing the real gods of our regime. You might have your calorie restriction, but if you're obese, you're still great. It's all good.
Yeah, it's a sort of a rip-off of the start of George Orwell's 1984. Sorry, I almost said 1989 then, because I was sort of thinking, God, it's when you sort of start confusing your own title with other people's that you get in real trouble. And there's video of you saying it, and then it gets broadcast and you look like an idiot forever. So that would have been very embarrassing. Um, but yeah, there's the start, he has the 2 minutes hate. So in this, you have the 2 minutes exercise, and obviously the NHS instructor is morbidly obese, but it's telling you to lose weight for your own health. But I thought it's actually not that far away from this. If you've ever had the misfortune to go into an NHS hospital or sort of GP clinic, the idea that someone morbidly obese may turn to telling you how unhealthy it is not that implausible.
No, no, I think
Um,
in a way the kind of the brilliance of this piece is just the fact, not necessarily the fact that everything is that you present as an outlandish concept, but that you unite so many details of our current existence into this, kind of picture, where it's like, all of these things individually do happen in the current in the present time, but they're not kind of melded together into this cohesive story of the future. They're just going to become permanent in the future. That's that's the problem. Anyway, I do point people towards that because it's a really lovely piece. Again, Britain 2049 is in the Critic, and I'll put it in the show notes. I think your training is as an economist, and this is kind of the perspective that you offer typically in your work.
yeah, so my background, I did my undergrad in economics at York, and I did my MPhil in economics at Oxford, and I did work as an economics consultant for a bit before I sort of switched into doing some of the writing full time. So I actually have one journal publication on economics as well, which came out last year. So this is like a small insight into academia, which is a world I've left well behind. But some friends and I think it must have been early March 2020, looked at this COVID stuff and went, right, but this is going to be really bad. I mean, we're saying that in February, but in March we decided to write a paper about it and say, okay, look, government does messaging. What's the sort of right way to tell people, like, do a bit of social distancing, do be careful, and sort of try not to spread this thing. Um, and what we actually found is that if you do sort of really terrifying messaging, which lots of governments have really sort of doubled down on, if you do the really terrifying message where you say, you're going to kill your grandmother and everyone you love, and you'll inevitably catch it if you go outside for 5 minutes, what actually happens is people go, oh, I'm definitely going to catch it. There's no point in taking any precautions whatsoever because, if I catch it now, I catch it next week. And staying at home is really boring. So we wrote that paper up, sort of our survey data and our sort of economic model of it all. It was all written and submitted sort of in March that year. I think it came out about a year later, because this is when economics journals work at top speed. They will you'll eventually get through the peer review process about 12 months down the line. So
Excellent.
so yeah, that
Well,
was interesting.
yeah, you have to be put through the gears and see if it's acceptable that you be reviewed by all your peers. Yeah, I mean, was the implication just that the messaging was wrong, and that essentially this is kind of the way everyone went, and yeah, I mean, was there any other unsavory implication to that paper?
Um, no, I mean there were a few interesting things actually. Like it was obviously really early on in the pandemic, so you had this one of the things we found where people were just they were actually already terrified basically, and so they were to the degree that anything you sort of did to scare them was more disadvantageous and advantageous because these are people who are saying I think at that point the R number was somewhere around like, maybe two, a bit more. I honestly can't remember because it's so long ago now. Whatever it wasn't that high. And you had people saying, yeah, if I catch it, I'll probably give it to 115 other people. Like we had in our responses, we had this massive spike at the upper round where we're like, well, no one's going to say more than 100 rights. And people kept clicking like 100 plus. So they were, or whatever the cap was. So you just had these people who were just absolutely terrified. They thought it's the end of the world. It's going to be sort of super transmissible. And to be fair to them, like it did feel a bit like the end of the world. You have governments sort of going into lockdown, health systems collapsing. It was. I think it's kind of hard to remember just how scary it was back then. And so the kind of message we were going with was, you really don't want to scare people more because they're just going to become completely fatalistic about this. But yeah, sorry, that's slightly off topic. But yeah, that's some of the research I used to do.
No, no, I think it's definitely on topic. I mean, there's probably not been a narrative disruption on the scale of COVID policy, ever before in our history, and it kind of it really laid bare the machinations of how the regime works and how narratives shift from one to the other. I mean, the first people on the scene with masks were weird forum dwellers, more right wing than left wing, and then it all flipped. And I mean, this happened not only in living memory; it was months ago. You could see this with your own eyes. So I think a lot of people had revelations about about how things work, and I feel like there's still a lot of kind of economic turmoil that has not been reckoned with that came from those policies and all of this stuff. And now people are okay. This is these are Putin's price hikes or Joe Biden's inflation or things like that. I mean, these were insane measures, unprecedented, and globally implemented by governments. And the idea that we've now moved on to the next thing, and whatever's happening now is the thing that's actually disturbing the economy, and it is in many ways. Obviously, you have a war and with a major superpower that's also a major gas provider. Obviously, those are connected, but at the same time, people were bailed out of COVID by giving them huge bales of money. So, I mean, that's not something that just you can just get over and then something else happens. I mean, how do you see this from your perch in the UK? I mean, do you see COVID fallout as being something that people are paying attention to, or is it just been papered over and now it's all about Putin?
Yeah, so it's really quite unfortunate in that we basically moved from one once in a generation crisis to another once in a generation crisis in the space of about 12 months. And these really are sort of, as much as we sort of might look back on COVID and say, oh, it's just the flu. I mean, it really was actually a sort of a really serious crisis until the point at which the vaccines were sort of available, and we sort of give them to all people and sort of stop having to lock everyone in their homes to keep them from dying. So I think one of the pieces of fallout which has sort of been maybe less reckoned with is what sort of happened over the period of COVID. Is you have this crisis and the government gets massively large to compensate, it spends way more money, it borrows way more money, and interferes in people's lives on a truly unprecedented scale. So the degree in the UK, it was basically telling you, not quite so explicitly, but basically de facto saying, if you live on your own, you can see your girlfriend or partner, like not at all. And if you live in a shared house later on, like one of you can see your partner. So, you're basically to the degree of like who can share your bed is not what they're regulating, which obviously in other contexts they would never do at all. So you have this sort of unprecedented expansion of the state into people's lives. And I think it's left a mark in that when you have a major war, the government borrows lots of money and spends lots of money and takes lots of control, after the war, it doesn't quite go back to where the previous high tide line was. It definitely contracts, it definitely retreats, but it still ends up larger than it was because it expands its responsibility to expand its spending, and it tends not to give those things up once it's done it. And so in the UK, we've had this quite real expansion in the size of the state due to this. And we're sort of now looking at sort of how we're going to fund that. In terms of the inflation, I think it's slightly unfortunate in a way. I mean, obviously, it's hugely unfortunate that Russia has invaded Ukraine and sort of caused this second crisis. But it's also, I think, sort of driven attention away from the fact that we were actually due for a fair bit of inflation anyway. And this is, I mean, it wasn't going to be quite the crisis that we have now, but we had quite a lot of demand that have been sort of suppressed during COVID. People staying at home, they're not going out, they're not spending, they're saving the money they are getting from the government. All this demand sort of filled up and then sort of unleashed at once toward the end of it. And it was unfurled into a world where COVID had done quite a lot of damage to supply chains. So, like, some companies have sort of shut down operations or slowed down operations. It's been back up to size. China is still doing sort of intermittent lockdowns, and sort of suddenly cities stop exporting, the ports shut down. So there's all this disruption. I think you can probably remember, if you think back to last October, November, there's queues of ships lined up off to go to the United States of America. So you could kind of see the stress in global supply chains back then, and that was going to drive price, and it was driving prices up. And what we kind of piled on top of that is now we have Russia saying, okay, no gas for you guys, and we're saying, okay, nothing for Russia. So you have these sort of massive sanctions and sort of blocks and trade going both ways. And so you have further disruption to supply chains, particularly in Europe. And it's all sort of just feeding into this inflation. I don't think the inflation is primarily caused by printing lots of money. I know Friedman would say it's everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon, but in this particular case, even if you held the stock of money completely constant, what's basically happened is such a massive contraction in supply. So you can think about the traditional upwards sloping supply graph, downward sloping demand graph. And if you saw the thought about that for the entire economy, each good, what's happened in Europe is energy prices have gone up through the roof. And obviously, dollar prices have gone through the roof as well because of the sort of distortion to shipping, which is still unfurling. And when you decrease supply like that, you have fewer goods in the economy. And if you have the same amount of money floating around chasing fewer goods, naturally prices go up to compensate because that's what they do. Prices are sort of your algorithm for matching supply to demand. And so when you have this big contraction, supply goes down, GDP goes down, prices go up in this particular way. And that's how you get stagflation, which is quite unusual. Economically speaking, it's not the standard sort of recession we're used to think of, like a financial crisis or something, which mostly hits the demand side of the economy, but leaves productive capacity mostly unchanged. This is not that scenario, which means it's also much harder to get out of because you can't sort of do fiscal stimulus. Monetary stimulus is exactly the opposite of what you want to do. And so governments have this really torrid time trying to get out of it. That doesn't mean they won't try sort of new and terrible policies. And we've just had COVID where they spent a lot of money and they've got used to the state being massively larger. And so to take from, I think we were discussing earlier before we started recording, we were discussing the state of things in the UK. And in particular, Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, who sort of comes in early this month, replaces Boris Johnson, who had one scandal too many at last. Although Liz Truss is now doing sufficiently bad in the poll that who knows, maybe we'll see Boris again next year at some point. But so we have Liz Truss replace Boris, who sort of self-destructed in spectacular fashion. And she sort of came in and won this leadership race on the back of being the free market, sort of small government candidate, sort of loved by the conservative right. So that's how she gets in, and she beats Rishi Sunak in the final pair-off. And from there, the first thing she basically does is say, right, as your new free market small state prime minister, we're going to spend 200 billion over the next 2 years on putting a cap on energy prices, which is just firstly, it's a massive intervention to make because we think it's 200 billion, but we have no idea because the state of the UK energy market basically is as follows. The UK has quite a lot of renewable energy and some nuclear. It doesn't really have very much coal. It has a reasonable amount of gas. And what this basically means is that the electricity generation that's easy to turn up and easy to turn down and on demand is going to be gas produced. So energy prices tend to move in line with gas prices because we have gas for heating, gas for cooking, you have electricity for everything else, but electricity is generated by gas and the marginal unit. So a lot of the time, the two basically move together sort of very, very closely. And we're basically always paying the marginal price of gas for stuff. That's a bit more given energy than sort of efficiency losses. That's sort of not the end of the world in and of itself, unless, for instance, because just to make clear, we have our own gas supplies, but mostly we import from Norway, and we import electricity directly from the continent. So this is all fine so long as there's not some sort of big aggregate shock which decreases gas supply and electricity supply across the continent. Say, for instance, if Russia stopped gas exports. So now, with everyone sort of scrambling across Europe for gas supplies, we are facing massively higher prices here. And the government stepped in and said, well, we'll cap them. And we'll pay the difference between what you pay as a household and what the market says you should pay. And it's also done this for businesses for at least 6 months. So the first thing is we don't know how much they're going to spend because it's basically completely reliant on what gas supply is going to be. It's completely reliant on what demand is going to be across the continent. If you have a very cold winter, everyone's buying gas, then the British government has basically said we are always going to be the marginal consumer of gas on the continent. So that's potentially really expensive. And the second thing is it's completely destroyed the incentive for people to reduce their gas use in a really significant way, because what you could have done, hypothetically, is say everyone's gas bill goes up £1,000, like to take an example. If you give them £1,000, they wouldn't keep using gas like they had the year before. They'd look at it and they go, okay, I've got £1,000, I can spend all that on my gas bill, or I can take 300 of it here and buy draft excluders, electric blankets, these kind of things that will make my life easier and house warmer. And I'll take another couple of hundred of that and spend it on things which I happen to quite like. I'm happy to turn the thermostat down 1 degree, have that extra money, and spend it on fuel for the car, go for extra drive, this kind of thing. Instead, what we've done is say we'll pay the difference between the energy price and what it should be for however much electricity you use, how much gas you use, but we're not going to help you with anything else. And so you end up in a situation where we're basically incentivizing higher use while trying to buy from the continent and while supply is low, which is basically a recipe for gas blackouts. So it's just an absolutely disastrous idea, and I think it could really come back to haunt us.
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially what we've been doing here in Romania for I think over a year now. This has been state policy, and it's just completely destroyed the energy distribution market. Like I mean, I've posted about this on Twitter, but my gas supplier just decided unilaterally that they're not going to supply. They just sent me kind of a cancellation of our contract. They haven't sent my contract to another gas supplier. They just told me that's it. You're not going to be getting any more gas from us. And then the problem is that we've been trying to contact other gas suppliers, and they will not return my calls. I've gotten a few, like since I posted that, I've gotten a few answers, but I mean, these are like 5x, 7x prices from suppliers of last resort. And, I'm still waiting to, yeah, maybe find someone who's not, going to charge me maybe double instead of, 7x. So yeah, it's quite the problem. I mean, this is this is for our family company for like an office building. This is not my home, which we're heated by electricity here, which is not necessarily much better because that's also exploding, also under a price cap, but also has the same issues where distribution market is completely upended, and this is mostly because regulations related to this are changing every week, every month there's some new thing. So everyone in the distribution market is either canceling contracts or not signing up new people because they don't really know what this is going to look like in whatever, a month or 2 or 6. So yeah, price caps, I don't necessarily think it's a very good. I mean, I'm sure the UK government might be better in handling the actual implementation of it, because this is partly the problem that we have here is just the government fumbling how it's actually executing on the price cap, and it's not there are obviously some corruption implications here as well. Which distributors are getting what, because this is all bankrolled by the state. So it's a problem. But yeah, for now we're in big trouble. And the price cap is guaranteed until March of 2023, which sounds decent for home consumers. But the problem is that, for example, for companies, the price cap is up to 85% of what you consume. So your distributor is just going to load that last 15% with the complete overhead that they didn't charge you for in the first one. So it's yeah, I mean the final bill is immense anyway. So yeah, we're in deep trouble here, and like I said, I'm not sure this is exactly how it's going to play out for the UK, but it might be giving you some pointers as to what might happen.
So the UK policy is a little bit different. It doesn't have that carve out for the last 15%. It has, I think it will basically be fine in that the UK government is going to pay the difference between the bills, and it's basically fully committed to doing so. So from that perspective, it won't be sort of it's not going to totally disrupt market functioning in that way. I suspect I make myself hostage fortune there, but I don't think it will. I think the problem it's going to cause is that it's going to keep demand massively higher than it should be. Um, when demand is high across Europe, I suspect there might be days when demand in the UK exceeds supply, and we'll end up with blackouts anyway, which would be amazing because it will be in the scenario of the government spending absolutely loads of money on keeping people supposedly warm in electricity, funding blackouts with those billions, and then basically sort of making the situation worse. So, it's certainly not what I would have done on day one in office, but I'm sure the trust team know better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with COVID, the policy of having broad lockdowns was something that felt a bit like, okay, you have a first mover, you see what they're doing, and then kind of a copycat move. And I feel like these price caps are something that's, this is not the first government doing this in Europe. It might be one of these situations where, okay, this is how other people are handling it. We're just going to import this policy wholesale and see what's happening. I mean, what does the situation? Do you know what the situation looks like in Greater Europe? I've just see this happening to governments around here, and seems to be like, the instant solution to to solve this problem. And yeah, feels a bit like reminiscent of lockdown.
I know the Germans are now, I think, basically on course to start doing domestic price caps as well, and that's sort of a lovely additional thing about this, which I'm not sure people have considered, which is if you have all the governments around Europe saying, okay, we'll pay the difference between what the price is and what it should be, that's obviously bad enough on its own terms. But if they all start doing it at the same time, they're all going to be bidding for the same units of electricity. They're going to be ramping the price up massively higher than it would be in any reasonable world, because basically what they've got now is got a scenario where they've set some price. The domestic consumers go, okay, at this price, I demand this much. They go off to the market and buy that. But across Europe, you add all that up, everyone's got an artificially low price, which is higher than the actual price is. Demand is therefore rather a lot higher than it should be. And so if you have a few countries which don't do price caps, which sort of lose out massively, and the prices are absolutely huge, or loads of countries do price caps, they demand loads of electricity, the governments bid against themselves, drive the prices absolutely through the roof, and then people don't get the electricity they want anyway because they've decided to completely screw the function of the European energy market. So the more countries that do this, like the worse the situation looks unless they start coordinating amongst themselves. But I mean, one of the things to say, which is just absolutely insane about this, is I was reading an analysis by an organization the other day, which was saying like, well, yes, like the price caps that Britain's introducing do increase the risk of blackouts. But to be fair, that's probably more equitable than the alternative because blackouts are evenly spread across the population. So, right. But they're also really, really bad. Like your aim as electricity as a government shouldn't be, we'll create blackouts because they're more equitable. It should be you should stop blackouts from happening, work out a way of getting money to the poorest households. But yeah, apparently that's not where people's heads are at.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't I think you've written about this? There's a note from the IMF, about the new policies implemented by the Liz Truss government, and it seemed like they were, I think they were objecting to the tax cuts, and that that the UK. I mean, looking at we've kind of laid out the disastrous direction that things are going in. Their main concern was about equity in terms of who is going to be affected by tax cuts, or maybe I'm getting this wrong, but it seemed to be like there was a clear value hierarchy baked into those statements, and it wasn't okay, keep the lights on. It was, who's getting what.
Yeah, so the IMF. So for a bit of context for the readers and or listeners, well, I keep saying readers. For the listeners who are sort of based in America and elsewhere who haven't really been following what Truss has done, she and her chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng have sort of come in and they have announced a sort of mini budget, which for various reasons which I won't go into here because they're quite sort of non-technical, have sort of really really spooked the markets. Partly because of the way they've announced it. I think a lot of it is a communication that they basically announced 45 billion per year of tax cuts. I mean, I say 45 billion, it's 27 billion next year, but it gets out to 45 billion by 2025, alongside sort of big increase in spending driven by inflation and sort of the needs to fund the NHS. Um, but I mean, they've not announced the spending increases, but the spending increases are baked in because of the fact that prices are going up. So what they've basically done is they said, okay, fine, we're going to pay for this somehow, but they've not said how they're going to pay for it. Like they haven't said if there'll be spending cuts because they would be big spending cuts. They haven't said if there'll be sort of more borrowing, and they've kind of hinted that it would be a combination of borrowing and economic growth, maybe some spending cuts. And so the markets basically have looked at this and gone, we're not confident that you can generate the economic growth needed to actually pay for this, which means either you're going to do tax increase in the future, you're going to do spending cuts in the future or now, or you're going to keep borrowing for an extended period. And either way, we don't like this very much. We want more information. We're going to sort of step back. So there's been this sort of quite fascinating sort of market sort of not really panic, but sort of adjustments. And part of this was the IMF stepping in and saying some of the same things that other participants were saying, and then turning around and saying, and also this is a budget which makes the UK much more unequal. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of prioritization because when you read the statement, it gave a lot of room to the point of budget quality, and much more so than I would think was warranted. In that, if you genuinely think the budget is a very bad reason for very bad idea, for reasons of fiscal sustainability, or for reasons of sort of driving inflation, or for any of these sort of, reasons, you should really be talking about those in some depth and explaining why and sort of saying what government should do instead. And what they actually kind of focused on was, well, this is very uneven. It gives more money to the richest households and relatively less money to the poorest. And as you say, it's a sort of fascinating sort of mindset, which really is everywhere now, that equality is kind of increasingly regarded as like an ultimate good in and of itself. And not just in terms of, it's a terrible cliche, but the sort of tradition would be sort of, you have, you want some equalization of outcome because you don't want some houses that are desperately poor. But you certainly don't want absolute equality of outcome, and that shouldn't be your sort of end goal. And it's sort of this sort of mindset which has started developing in some fields is now being expanded across the economic analysis in quite an interesting way.
Yeah, it seems like they don't necessarily mind if people are equal at zero, which was kind of the issue we had with communism. But now it seems to, if this is the high ordering principle, it does make sense. Like if everything flows from this, being equal at zero or being equal under the banner of a blackout is yeah, good enough. I want to speak to you about crime in the UK. I've spoken about crime in the UK quite, quite many times because it's just been such a shocking revelation to my own life. I'm from Eastern Europe, a place known for its crime and a place known for being the second world and but just trailing Western Europe in many respects. And then I moved to the UK, and then I live in East London, and just the the contact with urban crime has been an important I don't know, initiation in my life, and it's kind of led me to seek out all sorts of esoteric knowledge. You've written about this, and you've had an essay called "Crime is Being Decriminalized," and it did feel to me like that. I mean, I moved to London probably about 8 years ago now. I mean, I've been living in Romania for almost 3 years now, so I don't know. It feels like things have accelerated since then, but even then, it was a little bit jarring. So just the helplessness in a way, or the disinterest that I saw in the police and policing just basic, you know, petty crimes and violent crimes and things that were happening all around me, and also the helplessness of people because a lot of people were just not, they would either call the police and they would just, jot things down and say, yeah, we were just making a report about whatever happened here. Or people would just not call it in at all. It'd be like, okay, why do I need a police report for something that I know is not going to be investigated? So I don't know, what have you been seeing lately? Because I know you've written about this quite recently.
Yeah, so so for a bit of context, for again for sort of listeners overseas, one of the defining trends of British governments in the last 10 years was in 2010 we had a government elected under David Cameron with George Osborne as Chancellor, which embarked on a program of austerity. So the idea was it was going to shrink down sort of government borrowing, shrink down the deficits, and in particular sort of shrink down government spending. Um, and one of the things that basically happened was it cut the number of police officers really quite substantially. We're sort of talking, 10,000 plus officers off the beat, um, which has basically destroyed quite a lot of institutional knowledge and institutional capacity. And that, you've lost police serving officers. You've gone from 172,000 in 2010 to I think 150,000 in 2019. We're now back up to 160, and they're hoping to go back up to 170 sort of relatively soon. So basically, you have this big cut, and now they're sort of reversing it. So you have fewer police officers to investigate things, but also you have less resources to police. So in London in particular, I have a friend who's a police officer, and one of the things he complains about a lot is that you used to have these local stations with these sort of police officers in, but one of the consequences of the cuts was you didn't have enough officers to staff them. So you sort of consolidated these areas where you now have like one police officer responsible for several 100,000 people, one police station responsible for several 100,000 people. It's sort of quite a remarkable way. And and it's also worth saying as well, not only is this a problem, they also cut sort of spending on the jails, they cut spending on the criminal justice system. So you don't have the police officers to go out and investigate the crimes and catch criminals and do the sort of street patrolling that we know is really effective in deterring crime. We don't have the sort of court system which can process cases quickly. So you have people waiting years for the court dates after they committed some sort of terrible crime. You then have, on top of that, jails are full. They're really crowded. They're not operating properly. So you have people going to jail and getting like a really short sentence and getting really halfway through it. So you can have people commit spectacularly violent crimes, go in, get a 7-year sentence, be out in 3.5, reoffend, and into the cycle again. So like the criminal justice system is kind of just not really working. And basically, as a consequence of this, you have the police forces are solving the lowest proportion of crimes in record. It's like 6% of reported crimes, I think, result in charges. Sex offences are record highs. Some crimes have basically just been decriminalised, as we say. So like a really basic one is stealing from a vehicle. You smash out a window, take something from the car. There are 55,000 theft from vehicles reported in London last year. How many of those do you think were solved?
A handful, 5.
270, yeah, not much more. 270 out of 55,000. And now, again, like you say, people just don't report stuff to the police. They don't really be solved. So imagine how much higher that would be if you submit to that figure. Different version, 21,000 neighbourhoods in England and Wales last year, or in the last 3 years rather, reported that at least one burglary in that area had happened, right? Do you know how many areas where, of those 21,000, not a single one of those burglaries was solved? 17,000. So you have 21,000 areas say at least one burglary has happened here, and 17,000 of those police go, oh, well, can't do anything about it. So it's, and I think people really underestimate just how costly this is, because the welfare implications of crime are just absolutely massive. I think in America, I calculated, well, I didn't calculate, I got some other figures, sort of updated them using someone else's paper. Like you can put a cost on this somewhere around, I think it was around 7% of GDP in the USA. Like that's the welfare implication of this stuff. Probably lower in America, in the UK, because we don't have so much gun crime, we have quite so much violent crime, but still, significant. And it's just deeply frustrating because it doesn't really have to be this way. If you were getting these sort of, I think in England and Wales, somewhere around 50% of all the prison sentences that are handed out go to offenders who already have 15 previous convictions at least. And I feel like there's room here to be not 3 strikes and you're out, but now you've passed conviction number 10. Perhaps you should be putting you away for a slightly longer period rather than sort of waiting until 15, 16, 17. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just, yeah, remarkable.
No, I think it's I love your very gentle British hedging on this. I mean, to be honest, prison penal colonies had a certain logic to them. The Gulag might be making a comeback, and if Red Caesar comes. It's just, yeah, I mean, the idea that, you have these people essentially getting a education and how to be better criminals, spending a little bit of time workshopping their criminal ideas and then being put back out on the street again and again and again and reoffending. And the fact that this isn't just some that people aren't completely outraged by this is a problem. But I think it's also the way criminality is framed nowadays. It's framed as criminals are essentially victims of society, and by punishing them in any way that's not therapeutic, you're compounding the victimization of this person. This person's already suffered. They wouldn't be committing a crime if they weren't, victimized by some sort of systemic injustice. And that, that's kind of the logic behind defund this or that, or the fact that, there are too many people in prison. And it might be the case that some minor offenses shouldn't be, especially in the US, shouldn't be punished by prison sentences. That's arguable. But the idea that you have someone who's a repeat offender, many times over, orders of magnitudes over, and they're, just, being let out for good behavior and things like that is absolute insanity. Any sort of civilization before 5 minutes ago would have seen this on its face as being insane. Maybe they would have had gallows for this particular problem, but it's absurd. So, yeah, I like I said, I like the fact that you're hedging and things like that, but it's pretty clear that a more permanent solution needs to be found for these issues. Depending, if you have enough money to put them in prison, one, but or whatever is needed. That's kind of my position.
So I've actually written about this, and again, I think once you sort of look at the sheer cost of this crime to society, I think you actually find you do have enough money. You just don't sort of because I sometimes look at it this way, like if you lived in a lower crime society, because we'll sort of get onto this in a second. Like I think basically what you need is an expansion of jails and nicer jails, but I'll come back to it in a moment. But imagine that you locked away sort of the most violent criminals for a second. You could have, for the same amount of spending on criminal justice, so the same amount of spending on police, the same amount of spending on prisons and judges, and kind of, well, more on prisons, but the same amount of judges, you could have significantly lower crime in the rest of society. I think people really underestimate how much safer they would feel. Because do you remember a while ago there was an advert that came out, like I think it was Samsung's headphones or something, and everyone got very upset about it because it showed a woman going for a run at 2 a.m. And they went, "Well, that's completely unrealistic and it's unsafe, and they shouldn't be showing that." And I remember thinking, actually, why don't we live in a society where that's a reasonable position? Why can't people go for a jog at 2 a.m. if they want to? I mean, it might be cold out there, but it should be safe to do so. And there are societies, I think, where that is possible. So why don't we have that? And if you address crime significantly, you sort of push towards that. Alternatively, if you're really sort of cheap about things, you could cut spending on criminal justice quite significantly and have the same amount of crime, which might not be the best solution, but it would still save you a lot of money. So yeah, and I think the thing is people just don't really understand how tractable this is, because distribution of criminal behavior. So I wrote an essay for the Effective Altruism Forum on this because I was slightly frustrated with some of their approaches to these things. So I thought it might be worth trying to nudge them towards a better sort of way of looking at things. But if you look at the data in Sweden, I think about 1% of the total population accounts for something like 63% of all the violent crime. So this is it's basically just this one group of persistent offenders who, if you can sort of find and put them in prison, you reduce the sort of level of violence in society just massively. And it's not like we don't know who these people are, because they tend to. It's quite rare that someone's first criminal offence is like they've murdered someone. Like there's usually a pattern of like they escalate behaviour, they get increasingly violent, and then they do something like really, really bad. And the UK goes, "Oh my goodness, we need to put this person away for at least 10 years." Then they let them out and they do it again. Um, so there's this we kind of know who is likely to reoffend and who has sort of offended lots in the past. And then the second thing is like people talk about prisons reforming people, but that doesn't really seem to happen. Partly because prisons, I think, are often really unpleasant, brutalizing experiences, which we need to do a lot to improve. But also because these offenders are going to possess characteristics which require quite a lot of support in the prison and in general society, which makes it somewhat more likely they're going to reoffend. Like, I mean, there's data from New South Wales where like lots of the individuals who were sort of prosecuted for murder or like aggravated robbery or burglary, that kind of thing, they had really high discount rates. And what that basically means is they don't really think too much about the future when they're making decisions. Like they'll think about it, but they won't really weigh it. So if you're sitting there going like, if you do this bad thing, we'll put you in jail for a very long time, it doesn't really register next to the immediate reward. There's quite a lot of evidence around this, like in Italy and Sweden and other places as well. In the US and the UK, we know like a lot of the people who are making these decisions are, they're being, I think it's like 50,000 of 80,000 prisoners are being treated for alcohol or drug abuse in the UK. Somewhere like 85% of the US prison population has some sort of drug use issue or was incarcerated for a drug crime. And lots of them have mental health issues as well. So basically, we're sort of sitting there looking at these people and going, actually, I don't think the traditional economic model, which has guided a lot of things, which is basically, we will rationally look at the future, make a decision based on the punishment, and then not do this, is a very good fit for their behavior, because I don't think they're necessarily super rational. Which means in turn, like, well, what does deter crime? Well, incapacitation stops crime. If you're in prison, it's quite hard to commit a crime out in the streets. Which has sort of swayed me to my current view, which is that prison sentences should be quite long for serious crimes. And not only should they be quite long, but prisons should basically be taking the view that actually their prisoners are going to be there for quite a long time. I don't think short sentences for minor crimes are very useful at all. I don't think we should be doing this. So you sort of use prisons for warehousing really serious criminals away from the rest of society. And in turn, I think that means you have a moral obligation to make them sort of nicer places to be. It's almost like assisted living for people who basically can't survive in the rest of society, which is a little bit how Norway does it. And Norway has some sort of really quite successful model of keeping sort of crime down and sort of rehabilitating prisoners when they are released eventually. I don't think anyone really sort of looks at this and says, it's a massive policy success that US prisons are this brutalizing, sort of terrifying experience for people. Partly because I think we shouldn't maybe be in the business of doing what's effectively torture, and secondly because it's not really likely that when you put someone in that environment, they're going to perform in any sort of meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean it's clear that you kind of have to look at what the purpose of these systems is. It's clear that, I mean, in the past, the justice system was there for a general level of public safety. Now it's kind of turned into this more kind of therapeutic approach that, like you said, doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it's the even for the purposes that it's now intended to work for, it doesn't work, and it should be reformed even within its own principles. But the idea that this is for, yeah, for creating public safety is out the window. I mean, it doesn't seem like that's what's happening, because things are getting worse and worse and deteriorating before our very eyes, and none of the measures that people are taking seem to be geared towards making this better. I wanted to ask you the last question. This is a question everyone gets asked, and it is: do you have a subversive thinker? It could be a writer, it could be whoever's a bit influential in your thinking, that you think is underrated, that you think people should be reading more of, or checking out, or just knowing about?
Oh goodness. There's a few, but let's see which ones will not get referred to the UK's domestic radicalization program.
Oh,
Okay. No. I mean, actually, someone everyone should be reading who has been on the show is Ed West, who I think is an absolutely fantastic writer and thinker, and you should definitely read his Substack, The Wrong Side of History. Partly because he's just very, very funny and perceptive, but also because He's been quite influential in how I sort of developed as a writer, and I think he's also a really good guy. So I recommend Ed very wholeheartedly. Um, in terms of actual writers, the two I'm not sure you can describe them as subversive, but I think they are subversive relative to society today, but they would not have been in their own time so much. The two I'd really recommend are C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton. Um, I think C.S. Lewis, in particular, if you read the Screwtape Letters, is a really outstanding sort of explanation of sort of a certain sort of Christian view of humanity and human nature, and sort of how we struggle with temptation, how we struggle with the problem of evil. And it's also quite funny because it's written from the perspective of the demon trying to tempt you into doing wrong. So I recommend that because I refer to that a lot, just as sort of piece of philosophy/theology. And Chesterton, you should definitely read Orthodoxy, in which he talks about the problems of what he said was modern society then. And you just read it and you recognize so much of what is an issue in society today. There's a wonderful passage, for instance, where he talks about what makes a country or a city great. And he basically makes the argument in this wonderful phrasing: Rome was not loved because she was great. Rome was great because men loved her. And he basically says, if you love your country and you love your region and you do what is best for it, you'll find that it becomes great in and of itself. And I think that's a perspective that's sort of been lost. And I would also recommend wholeheartedly his talk on the virtues, because he says, and again, he's writing 100 years ago or so, that in his society, the modern society as he saw it, you had Christianity was in withdrawal. And obviously the vices were let loose in the world, but the virtues were let loose in the world and separated. And so you had scientists who cared for truth, but not for kindness. You had politicians who cared for kindness, but certainly not for truth. And you had all of these sort of things which were virtuous in and of themselves, separated from the others and sort of wandering the world and causing huge amounts of damage. And you can just look at that and look at modern politics and you go, actually, yes, there's a lot of our politics which is predicated on an idea of kindness, which involves just not telling things which are difficult to hear and true. And then there are people who sort of care almost entirely for truth at the expense of being extremely cruel to their fellow man. And I think, yeah, Chesterton, I would just wholeheartedly recommend.
Excellent. These are absolutely excellent recommendations. I love the screw tape letters, and I haven't read Orthodoxy, but it's definitely on my list. Please do read these recommended writers, and I want to thank you so much, Sam. This has been lovely. Sorry about the technical mishaps to you and to the listeners, but yeah, I think this is very much intelligible, and yeah, I'm very happy that you came on.
Thank you. I had a great time.
And I want to point people towards your writing and to the Marginally Productive Substack. Please do sign up. It's all in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.